Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session. Thank you for joining us. I know it's towards the end of the day and towards the end of the program, but we're really delighted that there are a great number of people in this session. A big special thanks to the organizers of TESOL Arabia 2020. We, from Egypt, we understand how challenging it is to run a virtual conference. We recently hosted one in Egypt on assessment in September, and Dr. Christine Koom honored us as a keynote speaker. So we thank you all the organizers for bringing this together at what is a very challenging time. So our session today is titled Fostering Real Dialogue in the ELT Classroom. Needless to say, we will be explaining what we mean by dialogue and further unpacking that a little bit later in the presentation. Just a brief introduction. So my name is Tamir Ismail. I'm the Head of English for Education Systems at the British Council in Egypt. And I'm joined by my colleague Hala Ahmed, the Academic Manager for the English for Interfaith Dialogue program. So we are delighted to be here with you today to talk about what we think is something really important for the classroom, that is dialogue. And we will be rooting it in a specific context, which we will further explain later. But it's based on our experience developing a classroom experience in Egypt. So we hope that some of the ideas here will be of wider relevance to us as practitioners, whether we work in schools or in higher education, and we will try to make some of the findings a little bit universal so that there is something to take away for us all. So just to start with, I hope you've all seen our session summary. But we will be reflecting on the development of a new curriculum for a British Council partner, and that is the English for Interfaith Dialogue program. And as you can see there, the whole aim of that program is to really promote trust, understanding, and empathy, working with a specific group of students in a religious-based education system in Egypt. And in terms of this session, we structured it into three parts. So first, we will be reflecting on what we think is the current paradigm in ELT teaching, with a particular preference for debate. And we can see how debate pervades a lot of the activities that we do, particularly around speaking in the ELT experience. And then we'll talk about how we've tried to counter some of the effects of debate by thinking about dialogue and mainstreaming dialogue in our materials and also in our teaching practice. And then hopefully there will be an opportunity for you as attendees to also reflect on some of these activities and think about how relevant they are to your context. And I also would like to say that we would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your perspectives on our experience, but also on how far you see this as applicable to your context too. So please do type in your thoughts in the chat. So just to walk you through the journey that we have been on in the English for Interfaith Dialogue team, working on this program. And it very much was, as I said, is based on a very specific situation with a specific group of students with specific needs, and the observation of a certain problem, and that was that we were aiming to develop a culture of dialogue within that particular center in order to feed into something a little bit bigger on a societal level, but that we were not necessarily seeing students engaging in dialogue. And so from that problem, we developed several hypotheses and then tested those hypotheses by developing a solution that was a new curriculum, and then ultimately applying it and testing it further through observation. So that is the journey that we have followed, and that's the journey that we're going to present today. And we are currently still in that observation period at the moment, but we are very happy. This is our first presentation reporting back on some of the findings that we have noted. So if we start with the problem, and perhaps this problem is not unique to the experience in Egypt, it's a universal one. If many of you follow political affairs, global affairs, you can see all kinds of problems with political polarization. There is polarization in amongst different cultural and religious communities as well. And so we all talk about these high-level societal aspirations. We want to see more diversity, more tolerance, more cohesion in society. But what we often perhaps don't think enough about is what our classroom is like, what type of environment that is, and whether we are aware of some of the things that we're doing that can inadvertently lead to polarization. And so what we've developed is an understanding of the importance of dialogue in countering some of the pernicious effects of polarization. And so we believe as educators, we do play a role in trying to tackle some of these bigger issues that surround us in society. And so we've attempted to design and develop a solution or a new approach in order to see some progress in that bigger matter. So our hypothesis was that maybe some of the materials, our pedagogies, indeed our classroom practice might inadvertently exacerbate some of the divisions that we see and that we naturally have in our classrooms that come into our classrooms from outside. And this may particularly be the case as well in certain contexts where we have students in minority communities that are perhaps marginalized or disenfranchised. We've also developed this hypothesis that debate is prominent in our ELT materials and curricula and practice as well, and that perhaps some of that debate might be further entrenching the polarization that we are experiencing. And so we entered a period of discovery where we investigated and explored a range of different teachers' practices, beliefs, and attitudes around debate, but crucially also thinking about the perceptions of debate from the student's perspective. And I'm sure many of us have our own beliefs about debate. There are advantages and disadvantages, which we will explore. But this was a key starting point. And certainly what we noticed from this discovery period was that debate does pervade our materials, our practice, and also our tests. We can see debate as a key part of certain written tests of English, for example. So if we are going to achieve some of these broader societal objectives, we want to look at dialogue instead of debate. Now, of course, here we have to distinguish between dialogue and debate, and often we would look at discussion as well. So this visual representation really highlights and fleshes out the key differences according to what most people understand. So typically, debate would be seen as pitting different ideas against each other and indeed individuals. It's often more confrontational, and there is often a winner or a loser. Whereas dialogue can be seen as a lot more of a collaborative and cooperative experience where the emphasis is on understanding one another and different perspectives rather than arriving at one final view or perspective. And this has been further elucidated in a variety of research studies and findings, just to mention two here specifically, which offer a kind of conceptual model or framework for distinguishing between debate and dialogue. We won't talk too much about these theories today, but certainly they can be noted in the literature if you are interested to look further into this. So that was the theory and the kind of assumptions, but then we start to look at the practice level and the perceived advantages of debate. These are some of the prominent responses that we receive from teachers when asked about the advantages of debate. So I think there is this idea that by doing debate, we are bringing in a more authentic experience into the classroom, and ultimately not just developing English language skills, but also some of those 21st century skills, which have become a key agenda in TESOL and in TEFL education. But certainly when it comes to the negative side, there are concerns and other considerations. As we've already seen, debate can pit people and ideas against each other. Typically, stronger students can dominate, which leaves a number of students on the periphery in the classroom and perhaps not engaged. And debate can often lead to the oversimplification of certain ideas or positions and lack the kind of nuance that is part of everyday life. Just to exemplify this with a few activities that teachers might do. Here we have a particular spoken activity. I'm sure it's not very distant from some of the things that we've done in our classroom in order to provoke discussion. But as you can see, it also does create a kind of spectrum where you have two polar opposites and it pits one idea against the other. Also, the way the question is asked is very much as a type of closed question. So it's assumed that one answer is correct here. If you look at the second example here, you can see this is from a teacher's resource book. You can see that a teacher is encouraged to provoke discussion through controversial topics, whether that's providing a picture or whether a statement and then encouraging discussion around that. Again, these type of activities seem fairly innocuous and quite prevalent. I'm sure many of us have done them, but it does raise the question of how some of these activities might be perceived by students. And again, what type of culture in the classroom we're creating, one of debate or one of dialogue. And again, this final example, indeed taken from a formal high stakes examination, shows again where we can have this encouraging debate and also exploring controversial topics. So we can see lots and lots of different examples across materials and tests, and I'm sure many of these won't be too unfamiliar to you. But if we are trying to move towards dialogue, that is a more cooperative understanding, more co-creation of knowledge and ideas, then perhaps we need to think about other aspects that are not traditionally part of our pedagogy and practice. So on the right-hand side, you can see a list of some of the factors and considerations that should help us in setting up activities where dialogue is the outcome. And if you think back here and reflect on your classes, the materials that you've used, perhaps even your training, you may think that lots of these points have been neglected or perhaps not dealt with at all. Certainly that's the case from my own experience. And perhaps we need to give more attention to them as educators if we are trying to move further towards dialogue. In terms of more specific activities, we have experimented on this curriculum with a variety, including the ones you can see on this list. And we will have the chance to look at some more specific examples later. My colleague Hala will be sharing them with you. But again, you might think some of these activities are lacking within our current materials. Certainly something like developing empathy is not traditionally seen as a core ELT material. So we're all familiar with the language and the functions of debate, but we are trying to move further, closer to dialogue. And so perhaps these are the type of exponents and chunks of language that we can or should be using more within our classrooms. So in terms of the program itself, it was piloted in Al-Azhar, which is a religious education university in Egypt. So we are dealing with higher education students. This particular faculty involves students of Islamic studies, and many of them are expected to go on into Islamic scholarship, and indeed preaching and leading in mosques across the country. And so our curriculum was very much rooted in a very specific context. We had a number of objectives in creating the curriculum, and here are some of them. And as you can see, they involve a lot more than just regular English language instruction and English language improvement. Clearly, we can see a focus on communication and 21st century skills and other ones too. And so we designed a curriculum that tackled what we called a subject domain of 9 different topics, which you can see on the left-hand side, but also cross-cutting themes or skills that would be embedded in the design of this curriculum. And the important thing to say here as well is it wasn't just the classroom activities, but also the projects, the tasks that were designed to be undertaken outside the classroom that would bring this whole experience alive. So the classroom and the community work was also essential. And in developing this curriculum, certainly we thought of many key questions came up along the way. How to make sure that the EID curriculum didn't become just a content course of learning about culture and learning about religion, but it was something that could be applied and lived in their experience of being community ambassadors and reaching out over cultural divides. Also, there was the question of how to embed certain skills rather than treating them as standalone. So we tackled that by looking at really innovative ways of getting critical thinking into the material design. And then, of course, the issue of diversity and how to mainstream diversity and ensure that different voices and perspectives were inputted into the design of the materials. And that was particularly important given that only a small size team were working on developing these materials. So these were some of the key questions. And so this gives a kind of summary of the instructional design, the design of a curriculum that was very much rooted in a specific audience and also tied to a bigger societal objective. And now my colleague Hala will talk more about some of these activities that were designed and some of our observations in delivering them. Over to you, Hala.
Thank you very much, Tamir, and thanks for the lovely introduction. I'll talk you through now the practical parts of the curriculum and how we applied all of the principles that Tamir touched upon into the curriculum, and I'll give you also practical examples to exemplify the application of this specific curriculum. So the first lesson in this program is usually fully dedicated to orientate the students in the principles of the course. And the first lesson or the orientation session usually stresses the value of dialogue. And you can see a snapshot taken from the first lesson. On your left-hand side, there is an activity and there is a picture that can be interpreted really in many different ways. And to trigger the discussions in the classroom, we ask the students, what do you see? So we expected the students to come up with different answers depending on how they see the pictures. And the main point here is to highlight that people have different perspectives and people can see the same thing from different angles. And this actually constitutes the basis of a dialogue rather than a debate. So all points of views are valid, all perspectives are valid as long as it's yours, as long as it tells the people your story, as long as it tells the people where you come from. And on your right-hand side, you can see some questions to support the discussion here in this activity. And the first question is really probably the most important one. Why do we see different things? So speaking about this particular picture, somebody can say, I can see two faces or two people looking at each other, or I can see a vase, or I can see mountains and mountains landscape, but on a vertical direction. So this is done on the first lesson, and we call it the orientation session. And we make it very clear from the beginning, from day one, that dialogue is valuable and it's much cherished in this course. Next slide, please, Kenny. Then another example or another insight from inside the curriculum is while we were designing and producing the materials, we made sure that the diversity and inclusion are embraced and magnified through dialogue, and they were visually represented, as you can see, through imagery, characters, roles, even the lesson titles and themes. So you can notice here from the snapshot taken from one of the lessons in the curriculum that we in terms of the visual representation, we have people from different walks of life, from different backgrounds and culture. We have veiled, unveiled, we have women, we have gender balance, we have males and females, we have people of color, and also the people, the way that the characters sitting in the pictures are not really sitting in the mode of debating. They are not facing or challenging each other. They are sitting mostly at round tables. They're sharing learning. They're talking about things. They're chit-chatting. And also, apart from the imagery and the characters, you can see from the lesson title that we promote the idea of diversity and we embrace the differences between people, which will feed later into the concept and the value of dialoguing. So the lesson title here is Different Places but Similar People. So you can go in different countries, you can visit different places, but the human beings will remain the human beings. They will remain the same. They will encounter the same feelings. They will encounter the same challenges. They will have the same struggles. They will have the same thoughts. Next one, please. Another insight from the curriculum is the way we stated and developed the learning objectives for each lesson. And the example you can see on the screen really was inspired by Bloom's taxonomy. And the verbs we used to state the learning objectives here were pitched at hot skills, and hot skills are the higher order thinking skills. So you can see that in this particular lesson, we are expecting the students to explain, to use, and to describe. And all of these verbs, you can see that they promote for the idea of opening up and speaking and talking about things. Again, this should promote the idea of dialoguing and sharing own and others' perspectives through explaining things and asking for clarification and using and implementing techniques to create dialogue and also to describe roles and tell people more about what you do in life. Next one, please. The snapshot I have now was taken from the facilitator's guide, and the teachers on this course are not called strictly teachers. We call them facilitators. And this really links and resonates with the idea that they facilitate discussion rather than they give instructions, and they teach language points. There is a part on language content and language teaching, but their role is more of facilitating discussions and enhancing dialogues inside the classroom. So you can see from this snapshot, this is a particular lesson, that the speaking activities really cover the bigger part than any other skill. So the time allocated in the lesson is given primarily to speaking activities rather than the other skills. And you can see from the way that the tasks are designed and the way the lesson is structured that the ultimate goal here is to promote speaking and communication in the context of dialoguing. Next one, please. But it's not just promoting speaking for the sake of it, because the counter argument might be here that, okay, you're promoting speaking for debates or for unstructured discussions, but actually we promote speaking and communication here to enhance critical thinking and sharing learning. So there is an example on the screen now. It's an activity taken from the curriculum. It's a think, pair, share. And it promotes the shifting the students from dwelling on one point of view toward and defending it desperately towards thinking critically and sharing learning. But that's not just it. It's also supported by instructions from the facilitator's guide. As you can see here, the guide is telling the teachers that the students will be doing this kind of activity a lot throughout the course. Next one, please. Now, to the practical examples of the curriculum, this is a staged listening activity, and it promotes really the idea of learner training. And I think learner training is a skill that is underestimated generally in ELT materials. And briefly, the activity is about to introduce somebody who's called Jamila, who's an expert a dialogue expert, and who works for an imaginary institution called the Honest Speaking Foundation. And we get them to predict what the task is about. Then they listen and take notes about Jamila's golden rules. Then they compare notes with each other. Then they identify examples from the audio text on open questions. Then they come up with more examples on open questions. Then at the final stage of the activity is to use these open questions to practice the interview that Jamila did in the audio. They interview each other using open questions. And at the end, they report back to the class and to the teacher on how it feels to have this empathetic listening activity and how it feels when they listen more with a focus on understanding rather than on replying. Next slide, please.
Hala, you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Actually, we picked up some observations from the classroom while implementing the curriculum, and one of the key observations we noticed is that due to the long existing educational and pedagogical heritage, the students were raised up in their schools and universities on debating and focusing on who's right and who's wrong rather than dialoguing. So that was an observation. Another observation was is that they want to conduct dialogues, but they lack the useful language. They need to do the dialogues like hedging and softening their voice tone. Another point also was there is a need to give feedback on the content and the quality of the ideas in the dialogue rather than only sticking to giving feedback on the language. And the final observation is whenever the students feel timid and they want to take up a specific role in dialogues, do it first, do it yourself, then they follow your steps and they will do it themselves. That was it. We were preparing some reflective exercise for you. So if you can put in the chat box anything useful you've taken from today's session, or something you need to think more about, or something you believe is not going to work in your context. But that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hala. And just bringing this session to a close now, we would invite the attendees who are with us to really reflect on to what extent their classroom is a debate-oriented classroom or a dialogue-oriented classroom. So really thinking about where you are on that spectrum, and also thinking about the potential for debate, but also the potential for dialogue. So where do you see opportunities to tap into? But at the same time, it's really important to think about the considerations of your learners, the different dynamics within your classroom, particularly in a multicultural, multi-faith setting. I know that's the case in many of the Gulf countries, and also therefore the attitudes of not just yourself as a teacher and the leaders, but also the learners as well. And maybe to make a start in experimenting with some of these ideas in order to bring about more dialogue. If you are interested in an article on this very topic, then Nick Peachy, one of the world-renowned writers in ELT, has written about this and blogged about this as well. So you can find his articles online. And maybe just a moment there to reflect on what type of society it is that we're trying to create, and how we as educators are empowered to really tackle with some of these issues with our classroom practice and what we decide to include. So if you do have any questions, please do write to us. We will finish there with our contacts slide. I'm not sure if we do have time, Christine, to take any questions.
I'm afraid we don't, because we're cutting into the next presentation, which I believe is you as well, isn't it? Okay.
That's right.
Sorry about that.
Thank you so much for having us this year, and we thank you for joining this session as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Everyone.